Betrayal doesn't whisper. It kicks the door in. At 1:45 in the morning, my daughter-in-law staggered into my house with mascara streaked down her cheeks and bruises blooming up her arms. Her voice shook like a trapped bird when she said, "He threw me out for another woman." I didn't hug her. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I lit the old lantern on the table, walked to the chest my husband left me, and turned the key I swore I'd never use. When the lid opened, I picked up the phone and made the call. Just 5 words. "It begins tonight. My name is Mabel Hale, 78 years old, widow for nearly 3 decades. I raised my boy with these 2 hands and no one else's. I gave up everything so he'd have more. And tonight, all of that came back to my doorstep like a curse. Where are you watching from right now? Kitchen table, armchair, or bed? Wherever you are, lean in. Because this isn't just a story. This is the night I stopped being silent. I was only 39 when my husband passed. His heart gave out in his sleep, leaving me with a boy who thought the world revolved around him. I poured every ounce of myself into keeping him afloat, shaping him into a man. I worked odd jobs, sewing, scrubbing, taking in boarders, anything to make sure he never knew the kind of hunger I grew up with. But sacrifices cut deep. Every piece of myself I gave to him. I never got back. That's the price of motherhood. You don't get refunds. You just pray the investment grows into something better than you. For a while, I thought it had. He married young, to a girl I barely knew but tried to welcome. She brought me a pie the first time they visited. Too sweet, crust half raw, but the effort told me what I needed to know. She wanted to belong. But masks slip. I saw the change in him long before tonight. His laugh grew sharper, crueler. He looked through her instead of at her. I asked her once, gently, if everything was all right. She smiled with lips that didn't touch her eyes and said, "He's just tired. Tired men don't leave bruises. Tired men don't throw their wives out at nearly 2 in the morning for someone else's bed." And yet, I said nothing. Year after year, I told myself it wasn't my place. He was grown, running his own house. If he raised his voice, if she shrank smaller by the day, well, that was their business. That's what we were taught, wasn't it? Family matters stayed behind closed doors. Silence was survival. So I kept my mouth shut, and silence rotted everything. When she stumbled into my house tonight, broken and shaking, I saw every year of my silence carved into her face. Anger burned hotter than grief. And in that moment I knew. My silence had raised this man. My silence had fed the rot. So I opened the chest. And with that call, I ended the silence. That chest had been sitting at the foot of my bed for near 4 decades. Oak, heavy as sin, corners worn smooth by the years. My husband built it with his own hands. When he died, he left me the key and a warning. If the boy ever strays too far, you'll know when to open it. I'd dusted it 100 times, but never once dared to turn the key. To me, it wasn't just wood and hinges. It was a line I wasn't ready to cross. Tonight, with my daughter-in-law's sobs leaking through the walls, I decided I had no choice left. The lock gave way with a tired click, like it had been waiting to breathe again. I lifted the lid, and the smell of cedar and iron rose up, mixing with the smoke from the lantern. Inside, everything was just as he'd left it. On top, wrapped in oilcloth, lay an old revolver. Not the kind you wave around to scare someone. The kind a man keeps polished, because it has already spoken once too many times. I set it aside gently, the metal cold even through the cloth. Beneath it, stacks of envelopes. Some fat with money, others thin with folded papers. And at the very bottom, a small leather notebook, no bigger than a pocket Bible. The edges were frayed, the pages lined with names and numbers I didn't recognize. For years, I had asked myself what he'd been mixed up in. My husband was never a loud man, never reckless, but there were nights he came home late, his knuckles scraped, his shirt smelling of smoke that wasn't from a cigarette. When I'd ask, he'd just look at me and say, "You don't want to know, Mabel." And maybe I didn't. Maybe I still don't. But I knew enough to trust that if he left this behind, it was for a reason. I thumbed through the notebook, each name written with a steady hand, numbers scrawled beside them. Some had been crossed out in red ink, others circled. One number had been marked with an X in the corner. That's the one I dialed. The phone on the wall felt strange in my hand, heavy, anchored to the past. My finger hovered over the rotary, and I thought about the weight of what I was about to do. Once that call went through, there was no going back. The line clicked after the first ring. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just a man's voice, low and flat. Still breathing? It was the kind of voice that had spent years saying less than it meant. "Barely," I answered. "I need you." There was silence on the other end. Not confusion, not hesitation. Just the sound of someone breathing, waiting. Then 3 words. "Where are you?" I gave the address. My address. The one they hadn't spoken aloud in over 30 years. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what had changed. Just said, "We'll be there." The line went dead. I hung up the receiver and stood there, my hand still on the phone, heart hammering, steady and cold. Behind me, I could hear her, my daughter-in-law, murmuring through her tears, rocking back and forth like she was trying to lull herself to sleep. I didn't go to her. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the revolver. The oilcloth came away slow, revealing the steel beneath. It was heavier than I remembered from the one time he had shown it to me, years ago. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to use it, but I knew I had the strength to show it. Sometimes that's enough. I set it on the table by the lantern, the glow catching on the barrel. My husband's ghost seemed to fill the room with it, stern and unflinching. I thought about the boy upstairs, my son, who had grown into a man I barely recognized. I thought about the girl he had broken, who now sat in my chair, bruises blossoming like violets on her skin. And I thought about the call I had just made, and the men who were already on their way. This was no longer about saving him. This was about saving what was left of us. By the time I walked back to her, the notebook was tucked in my apron, the revolver gleaming in the lamplight, and my voice steady. "Drink some water," I told her, setting a glass in her hands. "You're safe here. But you need to understand, tonight isn't about comfort. Tonight is about ending things before they end us." She looked at me then, eyes wide and searching, as though she was only just realizing who I really was. And maybe I was only just realizing it too. She sat hunched forward on my couch, knees drawn up like a child's, the blanket around her shoulders slipping every few seconds. In the lamplight, her bruises looked darker, almost like fingerprints pressed into clay. She didn't look at me when she spoke. She stared at her own hands as though they belonged to someone else. "I tried to make it work," she whispered. "I kept thinking he'd change back, that it was just stress, that the man I married was still in there." Her voice cracked on the last words, but she kept going. "He stopped coming home. He stopped calling me by my name. He called me you, like I was a nuisance in his way." I said nothing. The revolver sat on the table between us, wrapped again in its cloth. I could feel her eyes flick to it, then away, like a bird checking for predators. I didn't move it. Some truths need a little metal glinting in the corner of your vision before you can say them out loud. "He's not just cheating," she said after a moment. "It's worse. He's been running with men who—" She hesitated, swallowed hard. "I don't even know exactly. Cards, betting, money that isn't his. People show up at the door when he's not home. They ask questions I can't answer. They look at me like they're measuring me for a box." Her hands trembled, fingers interlacing and pulling apart again. She took a deep breath. The other woman, she's not just some fling. She's in it too. She's older, sharper. She knows about the debts. She uses him. He thinks he's in love, but he's just in over his head. I stayed standing, one hand on the back of the chair. Every sentence she spoke felt like another nail driven into a box I had built myself. Years of pretending my son was better than he was. Years of calling weakness, youth, selfishness, ambition. Now here was the bill. I begged him to stop, she said. Tonight? He hit me. First time with his hand, not his words. She lifted her arm and showed me the bruise, a bloom of purple and red at the crook of her elbow. Then he told me to leave. Said he was done pretending. Said he had someone else waiting. Her eyes finally rose to meet mine. They weren't pleading. They were hollow. I don't know where else to go, she said. I didn't want to come here. I didn't want to drag you into this. But I was scared. And you're the only one he still listens to. Or fears. I don't even know which. I sat down across from her, the chair creaking under my weight. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Outside, a car passed on the main road, its headlights flickering through the curtains like a signal. The sound of the clock in the kitchen ticked louder than usual. When your father died, I said finally, he left me with two things. That chest and a warning. I ignored the warning for a long time. Thought if I just kept my head down, life would smooth itself out. But silence isn't a cure. It's fertilizer. It lets the rot spread. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. What do we do? I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know if there was a way to pull him back from the edge. The call I had made wasn't for comfort. It was for accountability. The men who were coming weren't counselors or priests. They were the kind of men who solved problems permanently. You're safe here tonight, I said. That's all you need to think about. Her chin quivered. And him? I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. That depends on him, and on what he tells me when he walks through that door. She flinched a little at the certainty in my voice. She didn't know the men my husband used to run with. She didn't know how few options remained once their names were in a notebook, but she would soon enough. You don't have to, she started. I do. I cut her off gently. You came here because you knew I would. The room felt smaller, tighter. I could almost hear my husband's voice, the one he used when he was tired of my questions. If he ever strays too far, you'll know what to do. I had always imagined that meant a lecture, a little tough love, maybe some money shuffled around quietly to make his mess disappear. But tonight, the words felt heavier, final. I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain back. Out on the road, far down the hill, a pair of headlights moved slow and steady toward the house. Not rushing, not wandering, coming with purpose. They'll be here soon, I said quietly. Who? She asked. People who knew your father-in-law, I said. People who don't make small talk. Her hands tightened on the blanket. She didn't ask again. She just sat there, breathing shallow, eyes flicking between me and the window. I let the curtain fall back into place. My palms felt cold. I had crossed the line the moment I picked up the phone. Now all that was left was to see it through. The headlights cut across my front yard just before 3 a.m. No hesitation in their turn up the drive. No hurry either. The sort of pace that says, we're expected, and we've done this before. I stood at the window, the revolver still wrapped on the table behind me, and watched as the car rolled to a stop. An old black sedan, the kind built heavy, built to last. 3 men got out, their coats pulled close against the cold. They didn't look at one another, didn't speak, just moved together, quiet as wolves. My daughter-in-law's breath quickened when she heard the doors shut. Who are they? She whispered. People who owe me, I said, then corrected myself. People who owed your father-in-law. They're here because I called in a debt. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, but she didn't ask again. She understood that whatever was about to happen was no longer hers to stop. A knock came, sharp and deliberate, 3 beats on the wood. Not the knock of a stranger asking for help. The knock of men announcing they were already inside, whether I opened or not. I unlatched the door. The first to step in was tall, shoulders stooped, but still broad. His hair had gone white, but his eyes were the same grey I remembered from years ago, cold and assessing, the kind that flicks through a room and memorizes every detail. "Mabel," he said simply, his voice like gravel. "Frank?" I answered. That was all we needed. Names were enough. Behind him came 2 others, one shorter, one thick-set, both carrying the weight of age but not softened by it. They nodded to me, a respect that wasn't warmth but acknowledgement. The kind men give to someone who's carried their share of scars. The smell of night air and old leather followed them in. I closed the door behind them, and the house seemed to shrink with their presence. "She's in the living room," I said, nodding toward my daughter-in-law. They glanced at her, took in the bruises, then looked back at me. Not a word spoken, but everything said. Frank removed his gloves slowly, tucking them into his coat pocket. "Tell us." So I did. Not all at once, not dramatic, but steady. I told them about the debts, the other woman, the bruises, the lies. I didn't spare the details. Each sentence was like sliding a brick into place, building the wall that stood between my son and the mercy he thought he'd find here. When I finished, Frank leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "He's worse than his father ever was," he muttered. I stiffened. "Don't speak of him." He raised an eyebrow, but he didn't push. He knew the line between loyalty and insult was thin, even now. The shorter man, Leonard, finally spoke. "What do you want from us, Mabel?" Met his gaze. "Bring him to me. Tonight." No one argued. No one questioned. That's the thing about men like them. They don't waste breath on reasons. They act, and let the weight of the act settle later. My daughter-in-law shifted uneasily on the couch, her fingers twisting the blanket. "What will you do to him?" she asked. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because saying it aloud would make it real before it needed to be. Frank studied me a moment longer, then nodded once to the others. "Let's go." They turned and left as quietly as they came. The door shut behind them, and the night swallowed their footsteps. The sedan started up again, its headlights sweeping across the walls, then fading down the hill. The house was silent once more, except for the tick of the clock and the shallow breathing of the girl on my couch. "You just sent them after him?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, almost breaking. "Yes," I said. "And if he fights back?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The bruises, the fear, the way she still searched for some trace of the man she'd married. "If he fights back," I said quietly, "then maybe I raised a man after all. But if he doesn't, then we'll know what he truly is." Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak again. I sat down in the chair across from her, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. There was nothing left to prepare, nothing left to plan. The call had been made, the wheels already turning. All that was left was to see what kind of son walked through that door when they brought him back, and whether I still had the strength to look him in the eye. The knock came just before dawn. Not the sharp, deliberate rhythm from before. This one was harder, weight behind it. The kind of knock that doesn't ask permission, it announces a delivery. I rose from my chair, every joint stiff, and opened the door. The cold morning air rushed in first, then Frank and the others stepped through, dragging him between them. My son. He looked smaller than I remembered, though he thrashed like an animal caught in a trap. His coat was half-buttoned, hair wild, eyes bloodshot from drink, or worse. When he saw me standing there, He stopped struggling, just long enough to spit out, "Really, Ma? You called them?" I shut the door behind them. "Sit him down." They shoved him into the chair across from mine. He landed hard, but he tried to sit tall, his chest puffed out, jaw clenched. His eyes darted from me to the revolver on the table, still wrapped, but obvious. "You think this scares me?" he sneered, nodding toward it. "No," I said, "but maybe it should." His wife stirred on the couch, pulling the blanket tighter, trying to make herself small. When he noticed her, his face twisted. "You ran here? To her? After everything I've done for you?" That was the moment the last thread of patience inside me snapped. "You mean everything you've done to her?" I said. My voice was steady, but it cut sharp. The bruises, the lies, throwing her out in the middle of the night for another woman. That's not providing. That's destroying. He laughed, but it was hollow. "You don't know anything. You've been sitting in this house for years, rotting. I've been out there living, making moves, taking risks." "Risks?" I leaned forward. "You call debts risks? You call gambling with other people's money living? You call breaking your wife's arm ambition?" His smirk faltered. He looked at the men standing behind him, silent, watchful, and his bravado slipped another notch. "You set this up," he said, voice rising. "You think you can drag me back here and lecture me like I'm still a kid? I'm a grown man, Ma. I don't answer to you." I let the words hang in the air. Then I gestured at his wife, bruises blooming across her skin. "That's what a grown man looks like? A coward who raises his hand to someone smaller? That's not a man. That's a boy who never learned the word enough." He shifted in the chair, eyes darting, sweat starting at his temple. He tried to laugh again, but it caught in his throat. "You don't understand," he said quickly. "You think it's just cards, just a woman. But it's bigger. There are people. People you don't mess with. I can't just walk away." Frank's voice broke the silence then, low and flat. "You should have thought of that before you borrowed from them." My son's head snapped around. "And you... what? You're here to play babysitter? My father's dead. You don't own me." Frank stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until his hand rested on the back of my chair. "Your father's dead, yes, but his word isn't. And he left her to deal with what you became. That means you listen." The room felt heavy, air thick as syrup. My son's eyes flicked back to me. For the first time that night, I saw fear settle in. Not fear of the men, not even fear of the revolver. Fear of me. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "You've dragged this family's name through mud. You've broken the one person who still believed in you. And you've brought danger to my doorstep." He swallowed hard, lips parting like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. "Tonight," I said firmly, "you answer for it." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. His wife's breathing was ragged. The men behind him waited, motionless, as though the air itself had frozen. Finally, he lowered his head, staring at the floor. His voice was quieter now, stripped of swagger. "What do you want me to do?" I didn't answer yet. I let him sit in that question, let the weight of it press down until even he could feel the difference between a choice and a sentence. When I finally spoke, my words came out steady, final. "You'll hear it soon enough. But understand this. You don't get to decide anymore. Tonight, your father's shadow decides. And I am his voice." He looked up then, eyes wide, lips trembling. For the first time since he was dragged through that door, he stopped pretending he was in control. And that's when I knew the real confrontation had only just begun. The room held its breath. My son sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, eyes darting between me and the men who loomed behind him. He was waiting for an answer, but I let the silence work on him. Silence can do more than shouting ever could. Frank shifted, his voice a low rumble. He needs to hear it, Mabel. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. I had spent a lifetime protecting that boy, bending my back until it nearly broke. But protection without consequence isn't love. It's poison. Tonight was about cutting the dose. Here are your choices, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You walk away from the woman you've been sneaking around with. You walk away from the men you owe. You stay with your wife and you do the work, every damn day, to prove you can be a husband again. That's one path. His head snapped up, hope flickering across his face like a candle in wind. And the other? He asked. I looked at Frank. He stepped forward, resting his hand on my son's shoulder. Not a comfort, a weight. The other, Frank said, is simple. You're done. Cut off. No family. No name. When the men you owe come knocking, no one here will open the door. You'll stand alone. My son's eyes widened. He tried to laugh, but it came out sharp, desperate. You think you can just erase me? I'm your blood. I leaned forward, steady. Blood doesn't excuse you. Blood doesn't keep bruises off her arms. Blood doesn't pay back the men you owe. Blood means nothing if it's spoiled. His wife shifted on the couch, her voice trembling but clear. I can't keep living like this. If you want me to come back, it can't be halfway. It has to be real. No more lies. No more debts. He turned on her then, eyes blazing. After everything I've given you? Given me? She snapped, her voice breaking. You've taken from me my trust, my safety, my dignity. You didn't give me a thing I didn't already work for. The words hit him harder than mine did. His shoulders slumped, his mouth opening, closing, but nothing coming out. Frank placed the revolver on the table, unwrapped now, its steel glinting in the lamplight. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The meaning was clear. This was no bluff, no bedtime lecture. My son stared at it, his breathing shallow. So, this is it, huh? My own mother threatening me in her living room. I'm not threatening you, I said softly. I'm giving you what life never did. 2 choices. And this time, you don't get to pretend the cost isn't real. He swallowed, his hands twitching on his knees. For the first time all night, I saw the boy he used to be, hidden under the man he had become, scared, stubborn, lost. You think those men will just let me walk away? He whispered. Frank answered. If we step in, maybe. If we vouch. But you have to cut clean. That means burning bridges, not straddling them. My son shook his head, voice cracking. I can't. I don't know how. I leaned closer, my words sharp. Then learn. You've been handed second chances your whole life. This is your last. Take it, or walk out that door and never come back. The room fell still. His wife's eyes were wet, but she didn't speak. The men waited, solid as stone. And my son sat there, his pride and his fear warring inside him. Finally, he lowered his head. His voice came out rough, almost broken. I'll walk away. From her. From them. I'll try. I wanted to believe him. God help me. Some part of me still did. But I'd heard promises before. Promises are cheap. Frank picked up the revolver, slid it back into its cloth, and tucked it under his arm. Then the first step is proving it. Tonight, you cut ties. Tomorrow, we'll see if you're still breathing. My son nodded slowly, though his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't sure. He was terrified. And maybe that was what he needed. Fear can be a teacher, if you let it. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of years pressing down on me. This isn't over, I told him. This is just the beginning. If you slip again, you won't find me waiting. You'll find nothing. His hands clenched, unclenched. He glanced once more at his wife, but she didn't move toward him. She just looked away. That broke him more than any words we'd said. For a moment, I thought the choice had settled him. His shoulders sagged, his eyes lowered. But then, like a fever breaking, The truth pushed its way out. You think I can just walk away? His voice rose, bitter, shaking. You don't know who I owe. You don't know what I promised. They'll kill me before they let me go. And maybe they'll kill you too, once they find out you meddled. Frank and Leonard exchanged a look. Not fear, but recognition. They knew the type. Men who loaned fast, threatened harder, and collected with blood when money ran dry. My son rubbed his face with both hands, groaning. It's not just cards anymore, He stopped himself, but it was too late. Say it, I ordered. He glanced at me, then at his wife, then back at the revolver on the table. His voice dropped to a whisper. I laundered money for them, ran it through accounts at work, thought I was clever, thought I'd make enough to get ahead. But I lost more than I gained. Now they want it back, every dollar. And I don't have it. His wife covered her mouth with her hand, a muffled gasp escaping. I sat perfectly still, though inside my stomach churned. My boy hadn't just strayed. He'd stepped into the kind of darkness you don't climb back from. How much? Frank asked, his tone sharp. My son's lips trembled. 200,000, maybe more. I stopped keeping track. Leonard swore under his breath, pacing once. That's not debt. That's a death sentence. My son's voice cracked. That's why I went to her. The other woman. She said she could fix it. Said she had connections. But she's just bleeding me dry too. I'm trapped. I stared at him. My own blood. My only child. And all I could think was how far the apple had rolled from the tree. His father had been many things. Stern, secretive, sometimes hard, but reckless. Never. He knew the cost of mistakes. He respected the weight of consequence. And here was his son, begging like a child who'd broken a toy he couldn't replace. His wife shook her head, tears cutting through the bruises on her face. All this time, all the lies, and you still thought you could come home and pretend nothing was wrong. He turned toward her, desperate. I was trying to fix it. I didn't want to drag you into this. You already did, she snapped. Her voice cracked, but held. Every bruise, every night you didn't come home, you dragged me into it whether I wanted it or not. Frank placed a hand on the table, steady. You've got two choices, same as before. Cut loose or die with them. That's it. My son looked at me then, his eyes wide, pleading. Ma, you can't just sit there. You have to help me. You raised me. You owe me that much. Those words landed harder than any punch. You owe me. After everything. Every meal I skipped so he could eat. Every coin I pinched so he could have shoes. Every night I worked till my back screamed so he could live without shame. Now he looked at me and saw only a ledger where I owed him more. I leaned forward, my voice calm, deadly calm. No, I don't owe you anything anymore. I paid my debt the day I buried your father and carried you on my shoulders alone. I owe your wife my protection. I owe your father my word. But you, I shook my head. You've run out of credit with me. His face crumpled. The bravado finally burned away. He wasn't angry now. He was terrified. So that's it? You're just going to leave me to them? I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel it. The emptiness of standing alone. For once in his life, no one swooping in to clean the mess, no shield against the storm he'd invited. Finally, I spoke. You walk out that door tonight. You do it on your own 2 feet. Whatever waits for you out there, you face it without us. His wife broke then, sobbing quietly, her hands covering her face. The men stood silent, stone figures in the corner, and my son sat there, trembling, realizing the truth. The family he thought would always catch him had stepped back and let him fall. I reached across the table, not for him, but for the revolver. I wrapped it again, tucking it under my arm. My voice was flat, final. This house is not your refuge anymore. You don't bring your debts through my door. You don't bring your shame to her anymore. From this moment, you're on your own." He stared at me, mouth open, no words left. His lips trembled once, then pressed tight, and then he stood. The men moved slightly, ready, but I lifted a hand. Let him go. And so they did. He walked to the door slowly, like a man walking toward his own grave. At the threshold, he stopped, glanced back at me. For just a second, I thought I saw my boy again. The boy who used to run home with scraped knees. The boy who once cried for me in the night. But then it was gone. He opened the door, stepped into the cold, and the house closed behind him. The house was quiet after the door shut. Too quiet. I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the drive until there was nothing left but the tick of the kitchen clock. My daughter-in-law, no, my girl now, sat curled on the couch, her hands pressed to her face, shoulders shaking. I crossed the room, lowered myself beside her, and put a hand over hers. She startled at first, then leaned into me, sobbing into the wool of my sleeve. "It's over," I told her. But we both knew it wasn't. Not really. Men like my son don't vanish into thin air. The choices he made would hunt him down, sooner or later. Still, it wasn't our burden anymore. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift off my shoulders. Heavy as the air still was, there was a strange kind of relief in it. Frank and the others lingered by the door. Old soldiers, silent, watchful. They knew there was nothing more to say, nothing more to do. They'd answered the call, honored the debt, and now they'd melt back into the shadows where they lived. Frank tipped his head toward me. "You did what needed doing, Mabel. Don't let it eat you." I nodded. "Thank you." He studied me a moment longer, then let himself out. The others followed, their boots dull against the wood floor, then muffled by the dirt drive. The car rumbled to life and slipped away, taking the night with it. When they were gone, the house felt bigger than it had in years. Empty, yes, but not hollow. I guided her, my girl, to the table, set a cup of water in her trembling hands. She drank, slow, steady, then looked up at me through swollen eyes. "What if he comes back?" she whispered. "He won't," I said. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. "And if he does, he won't find what he left." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Her shoulders eased just a little, as though she'd been waiting her whole marriage for someone to tell her she was safe. The sky outside was softening, the first grey light of morning pressing against the curtains. Birds started their restless chatter. The world moved forward, as if it hadn't just watched a family fracture in the middle of the night. I stood, stretched my aching back, and looked at the chest at the foot of my bed down the hall. It was empty now, emptied of its secrets, its threats, its promises. But I realized something. It had never been the chest that carried the weight. It was me. And tonight, I had finally set it down. I turned back to her. "You'll stay here for now," I told her. "This house is yours as much as mine. You'll heal here. You'll sleep without fear here. Understand?" She nodded again, tears streaking down her cheeks. But this time they weren't just from pain. Relief sat in them too. I reached across the table and held her hand. Her skin was cold, but her grip tightened around mine like an anchor. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding on for someone else. I was holding on with someone. The light grew stronger, spilling across the floorboards, chasing away the last traces of the night. I thought about my husband, his warnings, his notebook of names. Thought about the son we'd raised, and how silence had rotted him from the inside out. And I thought about the choice I made tonight, the call I swore I'd never make. I faced my girl, my voice steady, but heavy with truth. I spent my whole life thinking silence was strength, that if I just held my tongue, swallowed my anger, it would keep the family together. But silence isn't strength. Silence is surrender, and I will never surrender again. She pressed my hand to her cheek, her eyes closing. For the first time since she'd stumbled through my door, she looked like she could breathe. I turned to the lantern on the table, its flame still burning low. I let it burn a moment longer, then snuffed it out with a steady breath. The smoke curled upward, fading into the air. And with the room finally still, I spoke, not just to her, not just to myself, but to you, the ones sitting at your tables, in your chairs, in your beds, listening to this night unravel. Tell me, what would you have done?